What would you do if the man who promised you forever was about to promise it to someone else? For Alara, this wasn't a nightmare. It was an invitation. An invitation to her own husband's wedding. He was Alistair Finch, a millionaire who thought his money could bury any secret. But he was wrong. She wasn't just his wife. She was the mother of his unborn child. And as the priest asked if anyone had any objections, the world was about to learn that hell hath no fury, like a woman scorned, armed with the truth and ready for war. The lie had a scent. It wasn't the cloying fragrance of Isabella's perfume that clung to Alistair's suits, a scent he tried to mask with frantic sprays of his own cologne. It was something deeper, more metallic, like the cold gleam of the marble floors in their penthouse apartment. It was the scent of money and secrets, a smell Alara Vance had become exquisitely attuned to over 5 years of marriage to the real estate magnate Alistair Finch. Their life was a masterpiece of public presentation. To the outside world, they were a golden couple. Alistair with his sharp Savile Row suits, a smile that could disarm billionaires, and a portfolio that was the envy of Wall Street. And Alara, his elegant raven-haired wife, a former art curator whose quiet grace was seen as the perfect complement to his aggressive ambition. Their photos graced the pages of Vogue and Tatler. Their names were whispered with reverence at charity galas, and their home, a glass-walled palace overlooking Central Park, was a testament to his success and her taste. But inside the gilded cage, the gold was peeling. The silence between them had grown from a comfortable quiet into a cavernous void. Dinners were tense, punctuated by the click of cutlery on porcelain and the relentless buzz of Alistair's phone, a phone that was now perpetually angled away from her, a phone that went with him into the bathroom when he showered. "Another late one at the office, darling," she'd ask, her voice carefully neutral as he stumbled in near midnight reeking of liquor and lies, closing the Kensington deal. "It's a monster," he'd reply, loosening his tie and avoiding her eyes. You wouldn't understand the pressure. Gaslighting had become his native tongue. He'd mastered the art of making her feel small, paranoid, and irrational. When she questioned the astronomical credit card bills from Cartier and Hermes for gifts she never received, he'd laugh it off. Client sweeteners. Alara, it's the cost of doing business. Don't be so provincial. When she found a single long strand of platinum blonde hair on his cashmere scarf, he'd turned it back on her. Are you snooping now? My God, I can't believe how insecure you've become. It's probably from someone at the firm. Jessica in accounting. Are you going to accuse me of sleeping with the entire staff? He made her doubt her own sanity. Chip by chip. He was an artist of manipulation, and she was his unwilling canvas. She began to feel like one of the porcelain dolls in her grandmother's collection, brittle, silent, and trapped behind glass. The woman who once confidently negotiated art acquisitions with formidable collectors now second-guessed every instinct. The turning point came on a Tuesday. Alistair was in the shower, and his second phone, the one he thought she didn't know about the burner, for his most important business, vibrated on the nightstand. On its dark screen, a message glowed for a fleeting second before vanishing. Isabella. Counting down the seconds until I'm Mrs. Finch. I love you more than words can say. The name Isabella wasn't new. It had been a whisper on a phone call he thought she couldn't overhear, a name on a restaurant booking he'd clumsily tried to explain away. But seeing it paired with Mrs. Finch was like a physical blow. The air rushed from her lungs. The room tilted. This wasn't just an affair. It was a replacement. He was actively erasing her. For a week she said nothing. She moved through her life like a ghost, the knowledge a cold, heavy stone in her stomach. She watched him lie to her face, his expressions of love now looking grotesque and farcical. The tenderness he'd once shown her was gone, replaced by a hollow performance. He was an actor playing the part of a husband, and he was getting bored with the role. She needed proof. Concrete, undeniable, world-shattering proof. Her sanity depended on it. With trembling hands, she made a call she never thought she'd have to make. She contacted a private investigator, a man named Gavin, a former NYPD detective with a reputation for discretion and ruthlessness. "I need you to find out everything about my husband Alistair Finch and a woman named Isabella Rossi," she said, her voice a low, steady tremor. "I need to know where they go, who they see, and what they're planning. Spare no expense." Gavin was efficient. The first report arrived a week later in a plain manila envelope delivered by courier. Alara took it to her private study, the one room in the penthouse that still felt like hers, surrounded by her books and the scent of old paper and jasmine tea. She ripped it open. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Inside were photographs. Dozens of them. Alistair and Isabella. Isabella, a stunning statuesque blonde with a predatory smile draped over Alistair on a yacht in the Hamptons. Alistair, his hand possessively on the small of Isabella's back as they left a Michelin-starred restaurant laughing at something she'd said. The two of them kissing passionately against the wall of a discreet boutique hotel in Soho. Each photo was a fresh stab to the heart. The betrayal was no longer a suspicion. It was a high-definition, full-color reality. But the final item in the envelope was the one that stopped her breath. It was a copy of a wedding invitation printed on thick, creamy cardstock embossed with gold leaf. Together with their families. Isabella Sophia Rossi and Alistair James Finch request the pleasure of your company at the celebration of their marriage, Saturday the 21st of June at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. St. Bartholomew, the Great, London, a wedding. Her husband was getting married in London in 3 weeks. He was a bigamist in waiting. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. He wasn't just cheating, he was building an entirely new life on the ashes of their own. He was going to marry his mistress while still married to her. A wave of nausea washed over her so intense she had to grip the edge of her mahogany desk. It was the same wave of sickness she'd been feeling every morning for the past 2 weeks, a sickness she had attributed to stress and heartbreak. But as she stared at the invitation, at the date, at the names, a different, more profound realization dawned on her. A chilling, terrifying, and suddenly empowering truth. It wasn't just the stress. The next morning she wasn't at a lawyer's office. She was at a clinic on the Upper East Side under the discreet care of a Dr. Eris Thorne. An hour later, the doctor confirmed her impossible suspicion. She was 10 weeks pregnant. Sitting in the sterile examination room, the paper crinkling beneath her, Alara looked out the window at the bustling city below. The nausea was gone, replaced by an ice-cold clarity. The stone in her stomach was no longer a stone of grief. It was a foundation. He hadn't just betrayed her, he had betrayed their child. A slow, dangerous smile touched Alara's lips for the first time in months. Alistair thought he was closing a deal. He thought he was upgrading his life, discarding his old model for a new one. He thought his money and power made him invincible. He had no idea that she was no longer a porcelain doll. She was the bomb, and she was about to walk into his wedding and detonate. The rage, when it finally broke through the ice of her shock, was a living thing. It was a cleansing fire that burned away the last vestiges of the timid, gaslit woman Alistair had tried to create. In its crucible, Alara Vance was reforged. Her first call was not to her mother or her best friend. It was to Julian Croft. Julian was more than just the family lawyer who had handled her prenuptial agreement. He was a shark in a handmade Italian suit. He was a man who saw the law not as a set of rules but as an arsenal of weapons. His office, a stark minimalist space in the Seagram building, felt like a war room. Alara sat across from him, the manila envelope on the polished glass table between them. She told him everything, her voice never wavering. She laid out the late nights, the secret phone, the lies, the photographs, and finally the wedding invitation. She slid it across the table. Julian, a man who had seen the ugliest depths of human depravity in divorce court, picked it up. His expression remained impassive, but she saw a muscle twitch in his jaw. "Alistair is planning to commit bigamy," he said, his voice a low growl. "This is beyond brazen. This is Pathological. That's not all, Ilara said, her gaze steady. She placed her hand on her stomach. I'm pregnant, Julian. 10 weeks. For the first time since she'd known him, Julian Croft looked genuinely stunned. He sat back, his eyes widening slightly. The corners of his mouth, usually set in a cynical line, turned upwards in what looked suspiciously like a predatory grin. Oh, Alistair, he murmured to himself. You magnificent fool. He looked at Ilara, his eyes alight with a fierce protective fire. This changes everything. The prenup you signed is strong, but this, a fraudulent marriage, attempted bigamy, and a child on the way. We're not just going to divorce him, Ilara. We're going to dismantle him. We will strip him down to the bone. The plan they hatched that afternoon was not one of simple revenge. It was a campaign of meticulous legal warfare. Julian's team immediately began filing motions, preparing injunctions, and subpoenaing financial records. He wanted to freeze Alistair's assets, but not yet. The timing had to be perfect. He cannot know that you know. Julian instructed, pacing his office. Not a whisper, not a hint. We let him walk all the way to the altar. We let him stand there in front of his family, his friends, his business partners, and we let him believe he's won. The public humiliation will be a weapon in itself. It will cripple his credibility. Ilara's role was to play the part of the oblivious wife. It was the hardest performance of her life. She had to smile when Alistair called from London telling her he was at a critical banking summit. Of course, darling, she'd say, her voice as sweet as poison. Work hard. I'm so proud of you. She imagined him with Isabella picking out floral arrangements, tasting wedding cakes, all while she was at home fielding calls from Julian's forensic accountants, who were uncovering a web of shell corporations and hidden accounts that would make a crime lord blush. The twist of the knife was that Alistair was using their joint marital assets to fund his new life. The down payment on the new London townhouse he'd bought for Isabella, the 5-carat diamond ring on her finger, the lavish wedding itself, Ilara was paying for her own replacement. The rage simmered, but she channeled it. It was fuel. While Alistair was planning his future, Ilara was preparing for battle. She booked a first-class ticket to London under her maiden name Vance. She arranged for Gavin, the PI, to have a team on the ground in London, not just for surveillance, but for media outreach. He had a list of the most voracious reporters from the UK tabloids ready to be unleashed at her signal. Then she went shopping. She didn't want a suit or a simple dress. She wanted armor. She found it in a small exclusive boutique in Soho, a place Alistair would never think to look. It was a gown by a couturier known for his dramatic silhouettes. It was made of a deep sapphire blue silk that seemed to drink the light. It was elegant, severe, and powerful. Most importantly, it was cut in a way that didn't hide her pregnancy, but framed it, making it an undeniable centerpiece. It was a declaration. In the days leading up to the wedding, a strange calm settled over her. She was an actress in the final moments before the curtain rose. She had her script, her costume, and her motivation. Julian had one final piece of strategic genius. The church saint. Bartholomew the Great, he said over a secure video call the day before she flew out. It's a Church of England establishment. They have very, very strict rules about marriage. A priest can refuse to marry someone if there is a lawful impediment. And being currently married to someone else is the definition of a lawful impediment. He had already drafted a letter complete with a copy of her and Alistair's New York marriage certificate and a signed affidavit from Dr. Thorne confirming her pregnancy. A member of Gavin's team would deliver it to the rector of the church an hour before the ceremony was due to begin. The priest will know, Julian said. He'll know the wedding is a sham before the organ even starts to play. He may even try to stop it himself. But I don't want him to. I want the choice, the power to be yours. This is your moment, Ilara, not his. As she packed her bag, placing the blue dress carefully inside, she caught her reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back was not the one from a few weeks ago. The haunted, hollowed-out look was gone. Her eyes were bright with purpose. Her chin was tilted at an angle of defiance. She placed a hand on her belly, a silent promise to the new life that had in turn given her a new life. "It's you and me, little one," she whispered. "Let's go show your father what a real commitment looks like." Flying across the Atlantic, she didn't sleep. She drank water, ate a small meal, and read over the financial reports Julian had sent. She was studying her enemy, learning his weaknesses. By the time the plane began its descent into Heathrow, she knew exactly where to strike. She checked into a suite at the Connaught, a world away from the flashy hotel where she knew Alistair and his party were staying. She spent the day in quiet preparation. She had a light meal, a long bath, and laid out the sapphire dress. It looked like a pool of midnight on the bed. Her phone buzzed. It was Gavin. "Gavin. He's at the church. She just arrived. The press is in position. Say the word." Alara took a deep breath. She looked at her reflection one last time. She was no longer just Ilara Vance, the scorned wife. She was a mother, a protector, a queen coming to reclaim her kingdom. She typed her reply. "Ilara, go. St. Bartholomew the Great is London's oldest surviving church. Its stone walls have soaked up nearly 1,000 years of secrets, sorrows, and vows, both sacred and profane. On this sun-drenched June afternoon, it was the stage for Alistair Finch's grandest illusion. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and old stone. Sunlight filtered through the high Norman arches painted the scene in hues of gold and gray. The pews were filled with a curated audience of London and New York's elite hedge fund managers with brittle smiles, aging socialites dripping in diamonds, and Alistair's parents, Eleanor and Richard Finch, radiating smug satisfaction from the front row. They had never truly approved of Alara, the quiet American curator. But Isabella Rossi, with her Italian industrialist pedigree and ruthless social ambition, was exactly the kind of daughter-in-law they desired. Alistair stood at the altar, a vision of bespoke perfection in a Tom Ford morning suit. He was beaming, shaking hands with his best man, his confidence absolute. He had pulled it off. In a few minutes he would have his new bride, and Alara would be a problem to be managed later, a business transaction to be closed with a generous settlement. He felt no guilt, only the thrill of the win. Then the organ swelled, playing Wagner's bridal chorus. The great wooden doors creaked open. Isabella was a spectacle. Her dress was a mountain of lace and tulle, a custom creation that had cost more than a luxury car. A veil of shimmering silk obscured her face, but her triumphant posture was unmistakable. As she began her slow procession down the aisle on her father's arm, a collective sigh of admiration rippled through the congregation. Alistair's smile widened. This was his prize. This was his future. The priest, an elderly man named Rector Davies, looked unusually pale. An hour ago a discreet young man had delivered a letter that had made his blood run cold. He had consulted with the bishop. He had been instructed to proceed, but to allow for a moment. He cleared his throat, his voice trembling slightly as he began the ancient rites. He welcomed the congregation, his eyes darting nervously towards the back of the church. He spoke of the sanctity of marriage, the holy union of man and woman, his words laced with an irony so thick it was almost suffocating. Isabella reached the altar. She handed her bouquet to her maid of honor and lifted her veil. Her face was flushed with victory. She looked at Alistair, her eyes full of adoration and ambition. He took her hands. They were a perfect couple, forged in lies. Rector Davies took a deep, shaky breath, turning to the assembled guests. This was the moment. Marriage is a holy estate. He began, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. It is not to be entered into unadvisedly or lightly, but reverently, discreetly, advisedly, soberly, and in the fear of God. Into this holy estate these two persons present come now to be joined. Therefore, if any man can show any just cause why they may not lawfully be joined together, let him now speak, or else hereafter forever hold his peace. A beat of profound silence. The traditional archaic words hung in the air, a formality that was never answered. The guests shuffled their feet, ready for the main event. Alistair gave Isabella's hand a reassuring squeeze. And then, from the back of the church, a sound. The heavy groan of the oak door swinging open again. Every head turned. Framed in the archway, silhouetted against the bright afternoon light, stood a figure. As she stepped forward into the cool twilight of the church, a wave of gasps rippled through the pews. It was Alara. She was breathtakingly, terrifyingly beautiful. Her sapphire blue dress was a slash of vibrant color in the muted palette of the wedding. Her dark hair was styled in sleek, severe waves. Her face was pale, her expression a mask of serene, righteous fury. She began to walk down the aisle, her heels clicking with a slow, deliberate rhythm on the ancient flagstones. It was not the hesitant walk of a bride, but the determined march of an executioner. As she drew closer, the full picture became devastatingly clear. The cut of her dress did not hide her body. It accentuated it. She was visibly, undeniably pregnant. Alistair's face went white. The blood drained from his head so fast he felt dizzy. His confident smile dissolved into a slack-jawed mask of horror. This wasn't possible. This was a nightmare. He looked from Alara's face to her rounded stomach and back again. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Isabella followed his gaze. Her look of adoration curdled into confusion, then dawning, sickening realization. "Alistair," she whispered, her voice tight with panic. "Who is that?" Alara stopped halfway down the aisle, her position ensuring she was the focal point of the entire church. She looked past the shocked faces of the guests, past the incandescent rage on the faces of Alistair's parents. Her eyes locked directly onto Alistair's. And then she spoke. Her voice was not a shout. It was calm, clear, and carried to every corner of the ancient church with chilling precision. Objection. The word, a single perfect syllable, shattered the silence. It echoed off the stone pillars. If a bomb had gone off, the effect could not have been more explosive. She took another step forward. "I have a just cause," she continued, her gaze unwavering. "You ask why this man cannot be lawfully joined to this woman? I'll give you 2 reasons. She paused, letting the weight of her presence settle. First, she said, her voice ringing with power, because he is already married. To me. A roar of incredulous murmuring erupted. Cameras previously hidden in guests' purses began to emerge. The PI's chosen reporters at the back of the church were already scribbling furiously. And second, Ilara's eyes flickered for a brief moment to Isabella, a look of almost pity on her face, before returning to bore into Alistair's soul. She placed a hand deliberately and possessively on her stomach. "Because I am his wife, and I am carrying his child." The collective gasp of the congregation was like the sound of the tide going out. In the stunning, ringing silence that followed, Alara stood her ground, a magnificent, avenging angel in blue. Alistair Finch's perfect, fraudulent world had just come crashing down around him, and she was the one who had single-handedly pulled out the foundation. The silence that followed Alara's declaration lasted only a few seconds, but it contained an eternity of ruin. It was a vacuum into which Alistair Finch's reputation, his future, and his carefully constructed empire collapsed. Then chaos erupted. Lies. "This is absurd." Eleanor Finch. Alistair's mother was the first to find her voice. She shot to her feet, her face a mask of puce-colored rage, her diamond necklace shaking. "Rector, remove this woman. She's hysterical." "Security." Isabella Rossi turned on Alistair, her face a terrifying mixture of confusion and fury. "Alistair, what is she talking about?" "Tell me she's lying," she shrieked, her voice cracking. Her fairy tale wedding had turned into a public vivisection. Alistair was paralyzed. His mind, usually so quick, so adept at spinning lies, was a blank slate of pure panic. He stared at Alara, at the impossible, damning curve of her stomach beneath the blue silk. A wife he could divorce. A pregnant wife was a catastrophe of an entirely different magnitude. She's my ex-wife," he stammered, the lie sounding weak and pathetic even to his own ears. "The divorce was finalized. She's mentally unstable. This is a shakedown, a desperate plea for money." Ilara laughed. It was not a sound of mirth, but a cold, sharp sound of contempt that cut through the rising clamor. "Ex-wife," she called out, taking another deliberate step forward. "That's strange, Alistair." "Because this," she held up her left hand, and the impressive diamond of her own wedding ring flashed under the church lights, "says I'm your current wife, as does the state of New York, as does our marriage certificate, a copy of which Rector Davies has in his possession right now." At the mention of his name, the rector flinched as if struck. All eyes turned to him. He clutched his book of common prayer like a shield, his face ashen. His silence was a damning confirmation. The reporters at the back of the church surged forward, their professional decorum abandoned. Flashbulbs began to pop, the staccato bursts of light illuminating the grotesque scene at the altar like a series of lightning strikes. The wedding had become a press conference from hell. "Is it true? Mr. Finch, are you a bigamist?" "Mrs. Finch, the other?" "Mrs. Finch, how long have you known? Is the baby yours?" "Alistair." Isabella's father, a formidable man with a face like thunder, grabbed Alistair by the arm of his expensive suit. "You have 5 seconds to explain this, or I will break you in half on this holy ground," he snarled in Italian. Alistair finally snapped out of his stupor, adrenaline surging through him. His survival instinct kicked in. He turned on Alara, his face contorting into a snarl of pure hatred. "You're ruining my life," he hissed, taking a menacing step toward her. "He never made it." A tall, impeccably dressed man stepped out from one of the front pews, moving with a speed that was startling. It was Julian Croft. He had flown in on a later flight, his presence the final piece of the strategic puzzle. He positioned himself calmly between Alistair and Alara. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Alistair," Julian said, his voice dangerously soft. "Assaulting a pregnant woman on top of everything else? Not a good look." He turned to the frantic reporters. "My name is Julian Croft. I am legal counsel for Mrs. Alara Vance Finch, the legal and lawfully wedded wife of Mr. Alistair Finch. We will be holding a press conference tomorrow in London. Until then, my client has no further comment." He then addressed the stunned congregation. "As for the rest of you, I believe this ceremony is concluded. Mr. Finch has just attempted to commit a felony. I'd advise you all to find the nearest exit." His words were like a starting pistol. The scene descended into bedlam. Guests scrambled for the doors, whispering frantically into their phones. Eleanor Finch was screaming at her husband to do something, while Richard Finch simply stared, his face the color of old parchment, realizing the social and financial fallout that was about to rain down upon their family name. In the eye of the storm stood Isabella. Her dream had become a global humiliation in the span of 5 minutes. Tears streamed down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. She looked at Alistair with utter revulsion, then at Alara with a dawning horrified respect. She ripped the spectacular 5-carat diamond ring from her finger and threw it at Alistair's chest. "You pig!" she screamed, the word echoing in the now emptying church. "You lying, fraudulent pig!" She gathered the ruin of her dress and fled through a side door, her sobs trailing behind her. Alistair was left alone at the altar, a pariah in his own life. The reporters, sensing he was now the only target, swarmed him. Julian gently took Alara's arm. "It's time to go," he whispered. "You did it." As he guided her back down the aisle, she didn't look back. She didn't need to see the wreckage. She could feel it. She had walked into that church a secret, a victim. She was walking out a victor, the author of a new reality. The clicks of her heels on the stone floor were no longer a war march. They were the sound of her walking into her future, a future she had seized with her own 2 hands. Outside in the bright London sunshine, a sleek black car was waiting. Gavin, the PI, held the door open. Before she got in, Alara paused and looked back at the ancient church. She had turned a house of God into a theater of war, and she didn't feel a shred of guilt. She felt a profound, cleansing sense of peace. She had lost a husband, but she had found herself, and she had saved her child from being born into a lie. As the car pulled away from the curb, leaving the baying press and the ruins of Alistair Finch's life behind Alara, leaned her head back against the soft leather and closed her eyes. The first battle was won, but she knew with absolute certainty the war was just beginning. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. The wedding of the year became the scandal of the decade. By the time Ilara's plane touched down in New York, the story was the lead item on every news site from the BBC to the New York Post. The photos were devastating Ilara magnificent and pregnant in her blue dress, Alistair pale and cornered, Isabella fleeing in tears, her fairy tale in tatters. The Finch name, once a synonym for power and success, was now a punchline. Alistair went to ground. He issued a frantic, typo-riddled statement through a crisis PR firm, claiming it was all a profound misunderstanding orchestrated by a vindictive and unstable ex-partner. Nobody bought it. His business partners began to distance themselves. Deals that were considered ironclad were suddenly under review. The stock of his publicly traded holding company, Finch Global, plummeted. Ilara, ensconced in the penthouse she now solely occupied, was the picture of calm. She ignored the hundreds of calls and texts. Under Julian's guidance, she was silent, allowing the narrative to be shaped by the sheer undeniable drama of the facts. But the real war was being fought not in the tabloids, but in the spreadsheets. Julian's forensic accounting team had been working around the clock, and what they were uncovering was far more sinister than bigamy and infidelity. "It's a house of cards," Ilara, Julian said, his face grim during a meeting in her study a week after the London debacle. He gestured to a series of complex diagrams on his laptop. "Alistair isn't just a cheat. He's a fraud. On a massive scale. The Finch global empire, the source of Alistair's immense wealth, was a labyrinth of shell corporations, inflated asset valuations, and illegal offshore accounts. He was running a sophisticated Ponzi scheme, using money from new investors to pay off old ones, all while siphoning millions for his lavish lifestyle. The Kensington deal he had been closing wasn't just a lie to cover his affair. It was a fiction designed to lure in a new round of funding to keep the whole rotten structure from collapsing. He's been cooking the books for at least a decade," Julian explained. "Your objection at the wedding didn't just ruin his reputation. It scared his investors. The wolves are at the door. He's desperate. He's likely trying to move as much liquid cash as he can out of the country before the SEC freezes everything." Ilara felt a chill run down her spine. The man she had married was a complete stranger, a phantom built of smoke and mirrors. "We can use this," she said, her voice hard. "We can expose him, not just for me, but for everyone he's cheated." "We're already on it," Julian assured her. "We're preparing a whistleblower report for the Securities and Exchange Commission. Once that's filed, it's all over for him. He'll be facing decades in prison." But as the accountants dug deeper, they found a thread that didn't make sense. A series of initial seed investments made over 15 years ago from a blind trust based in the Cayman Islands. This trust was the very foundation of Finch Global. It had provided Alistair with the capital to get started, the cornerstone of his entire empire. The identity of its owner was buried under layers of impenetrable legal firewalls. "Whoever this is, they were Alistair's original angel investor," Julian mused, pointing at the screen. "And they've been getting a quiet, steady percentage ever since. They enabled all of this." A week later, Julian called her with a tone in his voice she had never heard before, one of genuine shock and reluctance. "Ilara, we broke through the firewall on the blind trust," he said slowly. "We identified the benefactor, the original architect of Alistair's career." He paused. "I think you need to sit down." "Who is it?" Julian Ilara asked, her heart beginning to pound. Julian took a deep breath. "The trust is named the VMC Capital Fund. The sole signatory, the man who created it and funded it, is your father." The world dissolved into a roar of white noise in Ilara's ears. She dropped the phone. It clattered to the marble floor. Her father, Marcus Vance, a quiet, respected history professor, a widower who had raised her on his own. The man who had walked her down the aisle and given her hand to Alistair Finch, his eyes beaming with pride. Her moral compass, her rock. It was impossible. A mistake. But Julian was never mistaken. The confrontation was the most painful moment of her life. She drove to his brownstone in the West Village, the home she grew up in, a place of warmth and happy memories that now felt tainted. She found him in his study surrounded by his beloved books. He knew why she was there the moment he saw her face. The guilt was written all over his. "It was supposed to be for you, Ilara," he pleaded, his voice cracking, his face pale and haggard. "When you first started dating Alistair, I looked into him. I saw he was ambitious, but he was reckless. He had champagne tastes on a beer budget. I thought if I gave him the capital, if I set him up, he would build a life for you that I could never provide. I was securing your future. By funding a con artist," Ilara's voice was a broken whisper. "By helping him build an empire of lies. I didn't know it would get like this," he cried, tears welling in his eyes. "In the beginning, the business was legitimate. But he got greedy. He started cutting corners, hiding things. By the time I realized how deep the rot was, I was trapped. He knew I was the silent partner. If he went down, he would take me with him. He used it as leverage against me for years." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Her father's constant praise of Alistair, his gentle dismissal of her early concerns about him. He hadn't been reassuring his daughter. He had been protecting his investment. Protecting himself. The wedding, Ilara said, the realization dawning on her like a black sun. "Did you know about the wedding to Isabella Marcus?" Vance looked away, unable to meet her gaze. He stared at a crack in the plaster on his wall. His silence was the answer. "He told me he was divorcing you," he mumbled. "He said it was amicable. That he would take care of you. He promised me the business would be stabilized by his new marriage, by the Rossi family's money. He said it was the only way to protect what was left. The ultimate betrayal. It wasn't from her husband. It was from her father. He had been willing to stand by and watch his own daughter be discarded, publicly humiliated, and replaced, all to save his own skin and the dirty money he had invested. He had chosen Alistair over her. "You didn't secure my future, Dad," Ilara said, her voice devoid of all emotion. She felt hollowed out, a building gutted by fire. "You sold it." She turned and walked out of the study, out of the house she grew up in, and out of the life where her father was her hero. The serpent hadn't just been in her bed. It had been in her blood. She was truly, completely alone, and in that moment of absolute desolation, she knew what she had to do. It was no longer just about justice. It was about eradication. She wouldn't just dismantle Alistair's kingdom. She would salt the earth where it once stood. The revelation of her father's betrayal did not just break Ilara. It annihilated the woman she had been. The drive back from his West Village brownstone was a blur of streetlights and hollowed-out shock. She walked into her penthouse, the cavernous space once a symbol of Alistair's success, and for a single terrifying moment she felt nothing at all. The grief for her marriage, the rage at her husband, it was all a prelude. This was the main event. This was the betrayal that cut to the bone, to the very marrow of her identity. She stood in the center of the living room, surrounded by art she had curated and furniture he had paid for, and saw it all as a stage set for a grand deception in which she was the only one who didn't know her lines. The grief was a deep, cold ocean inside her, threatening to pull her under. But as she stood there, hand pressed against the life stirring within her, something else rose to the surface. Not hope. It was something harder, colder, more resolute. It was the realization that if everyone she had ever trusted was a liar, then she could trust no one but herself. The grief did not vanish. It froze. It calcified, forming a new spine of pure, unbreakable ice. The last of her sentimentality was gone, burned away in the fire of her father's confession. There was no one left to protect, no loyalties left to consider. There was only the truth and the brutal cleansing path forward. The next morning she walked into Julian Croft's office. The change in her was so profound that he stopped what he was doing and simply stared. The vulnerable, wronged wife was gone. In her place was a woman who looked as if she had walked through hell and found it disappointingly tepid. She didn't sit. She stood before his desk, a general before her war council. "I want him," she said, her voice flat, devoid of the emotion that had choked her just days before. "I want Alistair. And I want my father's involvement exposed. Every shell corporation, every laundered dollar, every lie. I want every single person who was complicit in this to face the consequences. No deals, no quiet settlements. I want a public reckoning." Julian nodded slowly, recognizing the dangerous glint in her eyes. "A scorched earth policy, Alara. Are you certain we have more than enough to ruin Alistair and secure your future? Bringing your father into this officially, it's another level of pain." "He made his choice," she said, her voice unwavering. "He chose to protect his investment over his daughter. He chose to stand by while my husband tried to erase me. The pain is already there, Julian. Hiding it won't make it go away. I want it all out in the light. I want the whole rotten tree pulled out by the roots, not just the branches pruned." They now had the ultimate leverage. The whistleblower report they were preparing for the SEC was no longer just about a philandering CEO. It was about the very origins of his fraudulent empire. The involvement of Marcus Vance, the esteemed academic, the moral intellectual, transformed the story from a simple financial crime into a Shakespearean tragedy of familial betrayal. It made the story irresistible. It made it lethal. The first move was to decapitate the enemy. Julian's team worked through the night, compiling every piece of evidence: the fraudulent wedding, the confirmed pregnancy, the flowcharts of laundered money, and the crown jewel, the signed documents from the VMC Capital Fund, linking Marcus Vance directly to the seed money that started it all. They filed for an emergency ex parte injunction. In a closed-door hearing, a federal judge stared at the mountain of evidence, his expression shifting from incredulity to outright fury. He granted the injunction immediately. With a single stroke of a pen, Alistair Finch's global assets were frozen. Every bank account, every property from London to the Cayman Islands, every stock certificate. The king was cut off from his treasury. The news reached Alistair via a panicked phone call from his banker while he was being asked to vacate his suite at Claridge's for an unpaid bill. He laughed at first, a sound of pure arrogance. Then, as the reality set in, his rage was volcanic. He was a king without a kingdom, a god without worshippers. He tried to call Alara, but the number was disconnected. He tried to call his father-in-law Marcus, the man who had always been his secret safety net. The call went straight to a terse voicemail from Julian Croft's office. The power he had wielded his entire adult life, the power to buy, bully, and lie his way out of any problem, had vanished. The mirror he held up to the world had been shattered by Alara, and his true pathetic self was all that was left. Then Julian filed the SEC report. It wasn't a bomb, it was a nuclear device. The federal investigation it triggered was swift and merciless. Alistair, finally realizing the game was over, was arrested at Heathrow Airport, attempting to board a flight to Dubai with a hastily forged passport and a briefcase containing what little cash he'd managed to scrounge. The images of him being led away in handcuffs, his handsome face unshaven and etched with a pathetic disbelief, became the final ignominious photograph of his public life. Her father was next. Julian, in a moment of professional courtesy, had alerted his attorney, giving Marcus the chance to turn himself in. But Marcus, clinging to the last shreds of his shattered dignity, refused. Federal agents arrived at his university office, a place of hushed reverence, and arrested him in front of his colleagues. The quiet shame of his downfall was in its own way more devastating than Alistair's noisy collapse. He didn't fight. He simply crumbled, an old man whose life of quiet integrity was exposed as a decades-long lie. Alara watched it on the news, feeling not triumph, but the grim finality of a necessary amputation. But justice was only the beginning. Rebuilding was the real war. In the smoldering wreckage of Finch Global, Julian's forensic accountants found something remarkable. Buried deep beneath the layers of fraudulent ventures were a handful of legitimate, undervalued assets. Smaller commercial properties and undeveloped plots of land that Alistair had acquired early in his career and forgotten about their value, quietly appreciating while he played with bigger, more dangerous toys. They were untainted by the fraud. They were diamonds in the sewer. Using her undeniable legal standing as his wife and the primary victim of his vast financial crimes, Ilara made a move of breathtaking audacity. In the ensuing bankruptcy proceedings, she didn't just sue for a monetary settlement. She petitioned the court to take control of these legitimate assets as direct, tangible restitution. Alistair's high-priced lawyers fought it tooth and nail, painting her as a vindictive opportunist. They forced her to testify. Ilara walked into that courtroom not as a victim, but as a strategist. She laid out the financial details with cold, impeccable logic. She presented a clear, viable business plan to develop the asset's salvage value and repay some of the smaller legitimate creditors Alistair had ruined. She proved she wasn't just a scorned wife. She was a more competent and ethical business person than her husband had ever been. The judge, impressed by her poise and the strength of her case, agreed. While Alistair sat in a federal detention center and her father awaited sentencing, Ilara went to work. The art curator was a ghost of a past life. She was a CEO. She incorporated her own company, Vance Realty, with that handful of clean properties as its foundation. She worked with a ferocious, single-minded intensity that stunned everyone around her. She was ruthless in negotiations, shrewd in her investments, and fanatically transparent with her finances. She hired a small, fiercely loyal team, cherry-picking the brightest junior employees from Finch Global who had been unaware of the corruption and were now adrift. They saw in her not just a boss, but a leader of unimpeachable integrity. The penthouse, once her gilded cage, became her command center. The cold marble floors, once silent and sterile, now echoed with the sounds of her team of passionate debates and strategy sessions that ran late into the night. It was a place of frantic, joyful creation. Months passed. The legal battles raged and concluded. Alistair was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. His parents, socially and financially ruined, vanished from public life. Isabella Rossi never returned to New York. Her father, Marcus, received a much lighter sentence, 2 years in a minimum security facility, and the forfeiture of every penny he had ever made from his secret fund. Ilara sent him a single brief letter, not of forgiveness but of finality. She was severing the last tie. The betrayal was too absolute to ever mend. One crisp autumn afternoon, 7 months after she had walked into that London church, Ilara stood in her new office, a modest but functional space in one of the very buildings she had reclaimed. Vance Realty had just closed its first major deal, securing financing to develop a mixed-use property in Brooklyn. It wasn't a flashy luxury tower. It was a community-focused project with affordable artist studios and green spaces. It was the antithesis of everything Alistair had stood for. It was small, but it was real, and it was hers. She looked out the window, her gaze sweeping over the Manhattan skyline. She was no longer overlooking the city from a cage built by a liar. She was seeing it from a vantage point she had fought for and built herself. She felt a powerful kick from within. A genuine, tired but triumphant smile touched her lips as she placed a hand on her belly. The baby, her son, was a constant, powerful reminder of her purpose. He was not the product of a broken marriage, but the catalyst for her liberation. The world had seen her as a victim, a scorned wife. They had watched her story unfold like a sensationalized drama, but they had missed the point. Her story wasn't about the fall of a millionaire. It was about the rise of a queen who had walked through the fire of utter betrayal and emerged not burned, but forged. A queen who had surveyed the ashes of her old life, and with her own 2 hands had built a new, better kingdom from the dust. Ilara's journey is a powerful testament to the strength that can be found in the deepest betrayals. She transformed her heartbreak into a weapon and her ruin into a foundation, proving that the end of one story is often the beginning of a much better one. Her tale isn't just about revenge, it's about reclamation of her life, her power, and her future. The hum of the ultrasound machine was supposed to be the soundtrack to the happiest day of her life. They were about to see their baby for the first time. Her husband, Torrin, a man who could buy cities, held her hand, his grip like ice. As the doctor showed them the tiny beating heart, he leaned in, his voice a venomous whisper meant only for her. What a mistake. He thought his secret was safe. He thought his money could bury the truth. But he never counted on the doctor in that room, a woman who saw more than just a picture on a screen. She saw his lie, and she was about to reveal a shocking truth that would shatter a gilded world forever. The silence in the Bentley was a familiar character in their marriage. It was a heavy, opulent silence, cushioned by hand-stitched leather and the whisper-quiet engine, but a silence nonetheless. Torrin Hawthorne, her husband of 3 years, drove with an unnerving stillness, his eyes fixed on the rain-slicked streets of New York City. His profile, sharp and handsome like a Roman coin, was a mask of serene indifference. To the outside world, he was a titan of industry, the brilliant CEO of Hawthorne Holdings, a man whose Midas touch turned every venture into gold. To Katya, he was becoming a beautiful, unknowable stranger. Their home, a sprawling penthouse on Park Avenue that Torrin called the Observatory, for its floor-to-ceiling windows felt less like a home and more like a museum. Every piece of art, every piece of furniture had been chosen by him. Her life, she was beginning to realize, had also been curated. She had been a promising art historian at the Met when they met. He had swept her off her feet with a whirlwind romance that felt like a fairy tale, dinners in Paris, surprise trips to see the Northern Lights, a blinding diamond that felt more like a beautiful handcuff. He had convinced her to leave her job. An artist needs a patron, Katya, he'd said, and a historian needs to be surrounded by history in the making. Your work is me now. It's us. And she, blinded by love and the sheer force of his personality, had agreed. Now her days were a structured series of luncheons with the wives of his business associates, charity galas, where her only role was to smile, and where his chosen designer, and long quiet afternoons, staring out at a city she lived in but no longer felt a part of. The pregnancy had been her idea, a desperate attempt to build a bridge across the growing chasm between them. She thought a baby, a piece of both of them, would force him to see her again, not just the polished accessory on his arm. When she told him, his reaction was muted. A flicker of something unreadable in his cool gray eyes, a tight smile. A Hawthorne air, he'd said the words tasting of legacy and lineage, not love and joy. We'll need to adjust the nursery plans. The ride to the renowned obstetrician, Dr. Anya Sharma, was no different. He hadn't wanted to come. It's the 20-week scan, Torrin, she had pleaded. We'll find out the gender. It's important. He had sighed, a long-suffering sound. I have the merger with Sterling Thorne, Katya. It's a delicate phase. This is more important than Sterling Thorne. She had said, a rare spark of defiance flashing within her. His jaw had tightened. Fine. I'll move my meeting with Mr. Sterling. But let's be efficient. Now, in the sterile, quiet room, the scent of antiseptic cleaner sharp in the air, that efficiency was all he radiated. He checked his Patek Philippe watch twice while the technician prepped her. Katya lay on the examination table, the paper crinkling beneath her, her stomach bare and covered in a cold, clear gel. Dr. Sharma entered with a warm smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She was a sharp, observant woman in her late 40s with a reputation for being one of the best. Mr. and Mrs. Hawthorne. Ready for the big show. Ready as we'll ever be, Katya said, trying to inject some lightness into the room. Torrin simply nodded, his gaze fixed on the large monitor. The technician, a young woman named Chloe, moved the transducer across Katya's belly. A monochrome world swirled into existence on the screen. It was abstract at first, a collection of shadows and light. Then Chloe pointed, and there we are. See that little flicker? That's the heartbeat. Strong and steady. Tears instantly welled in Katya's eyes. A tiny, pulsating light in the darkness. It was real. A life. Her baby. She turned to Torrin, her heart overflowing, expecting to see a reflection of her own awe. His face was stone. He wasn't looking at the heartbeat. He was looking at the vague outline of a tiny head, the curve of a minuscule spine. His hand, which had been resting limply on hers, tightened. She thought it was a gesture of shared emotion until he leaned in, his lips brushing her ear. The warmth of his breath was a stark contrast to the icy cruelty of his words. "It's a mistake." The whisper was so low, so venomous, it was like a snake bite. For a heartbeat, she thought she'd misheard. The hum of the machine, the doctor's cheerful commentary, surely she'd imagined it. But then she saw the subtle shift in his jaw, the cold finality in his eyes as he looked away from the screen and stared at a blank spot on the wall. He had said it. He had looked at their child, their miracle, and declared it a mistake. The air rushed out of her lungs. The tears that had been tears of joy turned to ash, burning her cheeks. Her hand went cold in his. The room which had felt full of life and promise a moment before was suddenly a tomb. Dr. Sharma and Chloe were oblivious, their professional chatter filling the void. "Everything looks perfect, Katya. Limbs are all there. Measurements are right on track. Do you want to know the gender?" Her voice was a strangled whisper. I don't know." Torrin released her hand and stood up, smoothing his bespoke suit jacket. "I have to take a call. The Sterling-Thorne merger won't wait." He looked at Dr. Sharma, a mask of polite apology firmly in place. "Doctor, please send the bill to my office. Katya, my driver, Thomas, will take you home." He didn't look at her. He didn't look at the screen again. He just walked out, leaving her half-naked on a paper-lined table with the ghost of his words echoing in the silent spaces of her heart. A mistake. Her baby. Their baby. A mistake. Dr. Sharma's cheerful demeanor had vanished. She looked from the empty doorway back to Katya's tear-streaked face. She turned to Chloe. "Chloe, could you give Mrs. Hawthorne some privacy to get dressed? And please hold all my calls for the next 15 minutes. Once Chloe had left Dr. Chasur, Sharma pulled a stool over her expression, a mixture of professional concern and something deeper. Something intensely human. She saw the devastation. She had to have seen Torrin's chilling detachment. "Katya," she said softly, her voice a lifeline. Deep breaths. "Can you tell me what happened just now?" Katya shook her head, a sob catching in her throat. He said. She couldn't repeat it. Saying it out loud would make it irrevocably real. Dr. Sharma didn't press. She simply placed a comforting hand on Katya's arm. Torrin's reaction was unusual, especially for a first-time father. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, held Katya's. "I have been a patient of the Hawthorne family's preferred hospital network for years. Torrin's medical file is extensive. I took the liberty of reviewing it before this appointment as a matter of due diligence." Katya frowned, confused. "His medical file? Why, doctor?" Sharma hesitated, as if weighing her next words on a scale of professional ethics versus human decency. There was a notation from his primary care physician, a Dr. Alistair Finch, to cross-reference his records with any spousal maternity care. It was an odd flag, so I looked into it. She took a deep breath. "Katya, what I'm about to tell you is a serious breach of patient confidentiality. But given what I just witnessed, I believe it is a matter of your safety and well-being." A cold dread, far colder than the ultrasound gel, seeped into Katya's bones. "What is it? Torrin had a severe case of mumps as a teenager?" She began, her voice low and steady. It was complicated by a condition called orchitis, inflammation of the testicles. The medical terms meant little to Katya. She was still stuck on the word mistake. The inflammation caused significant irreparable damage. Dr. Sharma continued, her gaze unwavering. "We ran a series of tests on him afterward. I have the records here. Katya, Torrin Hawthorne is and has been since he was 16 years old completely and irreversibly sterile. His condition is called azoospermia. There is a 0% chance that he can conceive a child naturally." The room began to spin. The black and white image of her baby on the screen seemed to mock her. 0% chance. Sterile. Irreversible. What are you saying?" she stammered, her mind refusing to connect the dots. Dr. Sharma's voice was gentle, but her words were devastatingly clear. I'm saying, Katya, that Torin knows he cannot be the father of your baby. The pieces clicked into place with the force of a gunshot. His muted reaction to the pregnancy, his distance, his controlling nature, and the whisper. It's a mistake. The mistake wasn't the baby. The mistake wasn't the pregnancy. The mistake was that she had gotten pregnant at all, because he knew with absolute scientific certainty that he wasn't the father. He hadn't been accusing the baby of being a mistake. He had been accusing her. The drive home from Dr. Sharma's office was a blur. Thomas Torin's stoic driver navigated through the city traffic with his usual silent competence, occasionally glancing at Katya in the rearview mirror, his brow furrowed with what might have been concern. She sat numbly in the back of the Bentley, the plush leather feeling like a cage. Her hand rested protectively on her belly, a gesture that was now fraught with a terrifying new meaning. Dr. Sharma's words echoed in her mind, a relentless, deafening drumbeat. Sterile. Irreversible. 0% chance. The doctor had been kind. She had given Katya a glass of water, a box of tissues, and the space to let the initial shock wash over her. She had also given her a warning. A man like Torin Hawthorne, with his resources and his pride. He will not take this revelation lightly, Katya. He is not a man who likes his narrative to be challenged. Be careful. She had printed a copy of the diagnostic report from Torin's file, a document dated over a decade ago, signed by a Dr. Alistair Finch, detailing the diagnosis of azoospermia. Proof is your only power now, she'd said, sliding it into a plain manila envelope. Guard this with your life. Back in the sterile perfection of the observatory, Katya walked through the cavernous living room like a ghost. The Warhol prints on the wall seemed to scream in silent mockery. The cityscape outside, usually a source of comfort, felt alien and menacing. Her whole life, this beautiful, curated life, was a lie, a meticulously constructed sham. She had not cheated on Torin. Not once. The very idea was absurd. She loved him, or she had loved the man she thought he was. Her mind raced frantically, trying to find an explanation. Any explanation other than the one staring her in the face. A miracle. A misdiagnosis. A 1 in a billion chance. But Dr. Sharma's certainty had been absolute. The proof was in the envelope clutched in her hand. If she hadn't cheated and he was sterile, then how was she pregnant? The question was a black hole threatening to swallow her whole. Torin came home late that evening. She heard his keys in the door, the soft click as he locked it behind him. She was sitting in the dark, the envelope on the marble coffee table in front of her. She hadn't moved for hours. He switched on a low lamp and the room was bathed in a soft golden glow. He loosened his tie, his movements fluid and confident. Katya. Why are you sitting in the dark? He didn't sound angry, just weary. The powerful CEO home from a long day of empire building. We need to talk, Torin, she said, her voice surprisingly steady. He sighed, running a hand through his perfectly styled dark hair. Can it wait? The Sterling Thorne deal is at a critical juncture. I'm exhausted. No, she said, her voice gaining strength. It can't wait. She gestured to the envelope. I had a very enlightening conversation with Dr. Sharma today, after you left. A flicker of something, anger, fear, crossed his face before being instantly suppressed, replaced by a look of paternalistic concern. He walked over and sat in the armchair opposite her, creating a deliberate distance between them. Are you all right? Is the baby okay? You seemed overwrought at the clinic. The casual cruelty of his words, the way he pretended her distress was just hormonal imbalance, ignited a fire in her chest. The baby is fine. But you know that, don't you? You saw the heartbeat. You also called our baby a mistake. He had the grace to look momentarily uncomfortable. Katya, you misheard. The room was noisy. I was talking about the merger. Don't lie to me, Torin, she said, her voice rising. Don't you dare lie to me. I heard you perfectly, and now I know why you said it. She pushed the envelope across the table. Dr. Sharma showed me this. Your medical file. From when you were 16. He glanced at the envelope but didn't touch it. A slow, cold smile spread across his lips, and the mask of the concerned husband dissolved, revealing the monster beneath. It was a chilling transformation. Dr. Sharma seems to have a problem with patient confidentiality, he said smoothly, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous tone. I'll have my legal team address that with the hospital board. She'll be lucky to practice medicine in this state again. This isn't about Dr. Sharma. This is about you, about us. Katya was on her feet now, her body trembling with a mixture of rage and terror. You're sterile, Torin. You have been for years. You knew you couldn't be this baby's father. You let me believe. You let me think I was going crazy. Why? He stood up, his height and presence suddenly overwhelming in the dimly lit room. He was no longer the charming man she had married. He was a predator. I didn't let you believe anything, Katya, he purred, taking a step towards her. I reacted to a simple biological fact. You came to me, told me you were pregnant. I am your husband. What was I to conclude? The implication hit her like a physical blow. You think I cheated on you. He gave a small, dismissive shrug. The science is quite clear. I cannot have children. You are having a child. The conclusion is elementary, my dear. I was willing, for the sake of appearances, to overlook your indiscretion, to raise the child as my own, to give it the Hawthorne name, the Hawthorne legacy. All I asked for was your discretion. But you couldn't even manage that. You had to create this drama. It was gaslighting of the highest order. So complete, so audacious that for a moment she almost questioned her own reality. He was twisting her fidelity into a betrayal, her joy into a scandal. He was painting himself as the magnanimous, cuckolded husband willing to forgive her transgression for the sake of his name. The mistake he'd referred to wasn't just her pregnancy, it was her failure to keep the secret of her affair. I never cheated on you, she whispered, horrified. I would never. Then how do you explain it? He shot back, his voice like a whip. A divine, immaculate conception. Did an angel visit you while I was closing the deal in Tokyo? Tears streamed down her face, hot and furious. I don't know. That's what I'm asking you, but I know I was faithful to you. He laughed, a short, ugly sound devoid of humor. Fidelity, a quaint concept. It doesn't matter anymore. You've made it matter. By bringing this out into the open, you've forced my hand. He walked to the bar and poured himself a whiskey, his back to her. You will carry this child. When it is born, you will sign over all parental rights to me. I will have a non-disclosure agreement drawn up, a very generous one. You will be well compensated for your services. Then you will disappear. You will move to Europe or California, I don't care. You will never contact me or the child again. Katya stared at him aghast. You want to buy my baby? You want me to give you my child and just leave? It's not your child, he said, turning to face her, his eyes like chips of ice. Genetically, it is half yours. But it will be a Hawthorne. It will be raised as my heir. You are merely the vessel, a very beautiful but ultimately disappointing vessel. The cruelty was breathtaking. He was systematically dismantling her identity, wife, partner, and now mother. She was nothing to him but a means to an end, an incubator for an heir he desperately needed but couldn't produce himself. Her mind reeled back to the central, impossible question. If she hadn't cheated and he was sterile, the answer had to lie somewhere in the space between those two truths. And Torin, in his arrogance, had just given her a clue. He wasn't surprised by the pregnancy. He was angry it had become complicated. He had a plan already in place. This wasn't a shock to him. This was an inconvenience. Her fear began to morph into something else. A cold, hard resolve. He was a liar. He was a manipulator. And he had underestimated her. No, she said the word tasting of newfound power. He raised an eyebrow. No, no. I will not give you my child. I will not disappear. and I will find out the truth." For the first time since she'd met him, Torrin Hawthorne looked genuinely surprised. He studied her for a long moment, a predator reassessing its prey. Then he smiled again, that same chilling, empty smile. "You have nothing, Katya," he said softly. "You signed a prenuptial agreement that leaves you with exactly what you came with, which was nothing. You have no job. Your friends are my friends. Your family is—" "Where exactly?" "That brother you never speak to. You live in my home. You eat my food. You wear my clothes. You are nothing without me. Do not make the mistake of thinking you can fight me. It's a battle you will lose. Miserably." He finished his whiskey and placed the glass down with a decisive click. "The offer stands until the day you give birth. Think carefully about your next move, because I will be thinking about mine." He walked out of the room, leaving her alone in the silence. But this time the silence was different. It was no longer empty. It was filled with the clarion call of war. He was right about one thing. She had a brother. A brother she hadn't spoken to in years because he'd seen the monster in Torrin long before she had. Her hands were shaking as she pulled out her phone. She scrolled through the contacts past the names of society wives and charity organizers until she found the one she was looking for, Liam Vance, her estranged, brilliant lawyer brother, her only hope. She pressed the call button, her heart pounding against her ribs. He answered on the second ring. "Katya." His voice was full of surprise. They hadn't spoken since her wedding day when he'd pulled her aside and begged her not to marry Torrin. "He's a shark, Katya. He'll eat you alive." She had called him jealous and dramatic. "Liam," she sobbed, the dam of her composure finally breaking. "Liam, I need your help." "You were right. You were right about everything." There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line, followed by the sound of a chair scraping against a floor. "Katya." "What's wrong? Where are you?" Liam's voice had shed its surprise and was now sharp with concern. "I'm at home." At the penthouse, she choked out between sobs. "Liam, I'm in trouble. I'm pregnant and Torrin—" "I'm on my way," he cut in. No hesitation. "Don't say anything else over the phone. Are you safe right now?" "Is he there?" "He's here, but in his study." "I'm okay for now. Lock your bedroom door. Don't talk to him. I'll be there in 30 minutes. Just hang on, Katya. I'm coming." The line went dead. For the first time in hours, a tiny sliver of hope pierced through Katya's terror. Liam had always been her protector. Growing up, he was the one who'd patched up her scraped knees and stood up to bullies. He'd gone to Columbia Law while she'd pursued art history at NYU. Their paths diverged, but the bond had been unbreakable until Torrin had systematically severed it, framing Liam's protectiveness as jealousy and disapproval of his wealth. "He can't stand to see you happy, Katya," Torrin had said. And she, a fool, had believed him. True to his word, 30 minutes later, the intercom buzzed. It was the front desk. "Mr. Hawthorne, a Mr. Liam Vance is here to see you." The doorman, of course, assumed Liam was here to see the man of the house. Torrin's voice came over the internal speaker, cold and clipped. "I'm not expecting a Mr. Vance. Send him away." Her blood ran cold. He was trying to isolate her completely. She grabbed her phone and texted Liam frantically. "He won't let you up. He's trying to block me in." Liam's reply was almost instant. "Go to the service elevator at the end of the hall. Now!" Her heart hammered against her ribs. The service elevator was used by catering staff and maintenance. Torrin would never think to monitor it. She slipped out of the living room, her bare feet silent on the cold marble floors. She could hear Torrin on a phone call in his study, his voice a low, angry murmur. She crept down the long hallway past the gallery of curated art, her hand still protectively on her belly. The service elevator was utilitarian and stark. She jabbed the button and prayed. The doors slid open with a quiet hum, and there stood Liam. He looked older than she remembered, His sandy hair was a little shorter, and there were fine lines around his eyes. But those eyes were the same fiercely intelligent and full of a protective warmth that she suddenly realized she had been starved of for 3 years. He pulled her into a hug, and she clung to him, the sobs she'd been suppressing finally breaking free. "It's okay," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. "I've got you. Let's get out of here." They rode the elevator down in silence. He led her out a back exit into a grimy alley she'd never known existed a world away from the polished lobby of Park Avenue. The cold night air was a shock to her system. He hailed a yellow cab, and soon they were speeding away, the glittering lights of her prison shrinking in the distance. Liam's apartment in Greenwich Village was the complete antithesis of her penthouse. It was cluttered with books, legal pads, and a friendly-looking ficus tree. It smelled of coffee and old paper. It felt real. He sat her down on a worn leather sofa, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, and made her a cup of tea. As she sipped the hot, sweet liquid, the story came tumbling out. She told him everything. The ultrasound, Torrens' whisper, Dr. Sharma's revelation, the medical report which she'd had the presence of mind to shove into her purse, the horrifying confrontation, the gaslighting Torrens' ultimatum to take her baby and disappear. Liam listened without interruption, his expression growing darker with every word. He took the medical report and read it carefully, his lawyerly gaze missing nothing. When she was finished, a heavy silence filled the room. "That son of a bitch," he said, his voice a low growl. "I knew he was a controlling bastard, but this is sociopathic." He looked at her, his eyes full of a pain that mirrored her own. "Katya, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry I didn't fight harder for you." "It's not your fault," she whispered. "He's a master manipulator. He isolated me and I let him." Liam shook his head. "No more. That ends tonight. First things first, he can't force you to give up your child. Parental rights are not a commodity to be bought and sold. His threats are designed to terrorize you into submission. But he has so much power, Liam. The best lawyers, the judges. He told me he'd ruin Dr. Sharma." "He'll try," Liam said, his jaw tight. "But Dr. Sharma has ethics on her side, and a good lawyer, which I will make sure she has, can argue that her duty of care to you, a patient in clear distress, superseded her duty of confidentiality to him, especially when he was using that confidentiality to perpetrate fraud and emotional abuse." He started pacing his mind, clearly working. "The prenup is another issue. Torrens' legal team is the best money can buy. They would have made it ironclad. He's right that you'd likely walk away with very little. But we're not going after his money. We're going for something more important, your freedom, your child, and the truth." He stopped and looked at her. "Katya, this is critical. You said you never cheated." "Never," she said with absolute conviction. "I believe you," he said immediately. "Which leaves a gaping hole in the middle of this. You are pregnant. He is sterile. He knew he was sterile. Yet he wasn't entirely surprised by the pregnancy. He was just angry it became public knowledge between you. He already had a plan to take the baby. This suggests he was expecting a child. Just not in this messy way." Her own thoughts, which had been a chaotic storm, began to clear as Liam laid them out with such logical precision. He was expecting a child. She repeated the idea, solidifying. "So, how?" "There are ways," Liam said, starting to list them on his fingers. "Surrogacy, for one. But you're the one who's pregnant, so that's out. Adoption possible, but the timeline doesn't fit. That leaves assisted reproductive technology. IVF. The acronym hung in the air. In vitro fertilization. But IVF, with what she asked, confused. His sperm is non-viable." "Exactly," Liam said, his eyes gleaming with a hunter's intensity. "It would have to be with donor sperm." "But you would know if you went through an IVF cycle, Katya. The hormone injections, the procedures. You'd know." She shook her head. "No, nothing like that ever happened." They were silent for a moment, both staring at the impossible puzzle. A pregnancy without intercourse with a fertile partner and without a clinical IVF procedure. It made no sense. Unless... Liam began slowly, his eyes narrowing. Unless the insemination happened without your knowledge. The blood drained from her face. What? How is that even possible? I don't know, he admitted. It sounds like something out of a spy novel. But with a man like Torin, a man with infinite resources and a complete lack of a moral compass, we can't rule anything out. We have to start thinking like he does. Where are the vulnerabilities? Where could he have intervened? He grabbed a legal pad and a pen. Okay, let's be systematic. Think back. Katya, any unusual medical appointments? Procedures? Even a routine checkup that felt off? Any new vitamins or medications he insisted you take? She racked her brain, replaying the last 9 months in her head. Torin was obsessed with their health, but she had always seen it as part of his controlling nature. He'd switched her gynecologist about a year ago to a private clinic. He'd vetted a place called the Westwood Wellness Clinic, run by a Dr. Lena Hansen. It was exclusive, expensive, and catered to the city's elite. She'd had her annual checkup there. There was my annual pap smear at the Westwood Clinic, she said slowly. About 9 months ago. It was routine. Dr. Hansen was very professional, very slick. Anything else? Torin started me on a new regimen of prenatal vitamins about a month before that, she recalled. He had them specially formulated by a compounding pharmacy in Switzerland. He said they were the purest, most effective ones available. Liam wrote it all down. Westwood Wellness Clinic, Dr. Lena Hansen, Swiss vitamins. He looked up at her. It's a long shot, Katya, but this is where we start digging. We need to find out who owns Westwood, who Dr. Hansen is connected to, and we need to get our hands on one of those vitamin bottles. He looked at the blanket draped over her, at her exhausted, tear-stained face. His expression softened. But first you need to rest. You're safe here. Torin doesn't know this address. I moved 3 years ago after the wedding. The unspoken words hung in the air after she chose him over her brother. Tomorrow, Liam said, his voice firm with resolve, we start fighting back. And our first objective is a strategic retreat. You can't go back to the penthouse. We need to get your essential belongings, your passport, your personal documents, anything of sentimental value. We have to do it fast before he realizes you've bolted and locks everything down. The thought of going back into that gilded cage, even for a moment, filled her with dread. But Liam was right. She couldn't let Torin erase every trace of her existence. He'll be at his office all morning, she said, her voice barely a whisper. He has a board meeting. He'll be gone from 8 a.m. to at least noon. Liam nodded. Okay, we have a 4-hour window. We go in, we get your things, and we get out. And then we disappear while I start digging into Mr. Torin Hawthorne's beautifully curated world. I have a feeling we're about to find some very ugly secrets hidden in the fine print. That night, huddled on Liam's sofa, Katya finally slept. It was a restless sleep, punctuated by nightmares of cold whispers and icy smiles. But for the first time in a long time, she wasn't alone in the dark. She had an ally, and they had a plan. The great Torin Hawthorne had made a critical error. He had pushed her so far that she had nothing left to lose, and in doing so, he had transformed his polished, docile wife into an adversary. He had no idea the war he had just started. The next morning, the city was shrouded in a gray, determined drizzle that matched Katya's mood. Liam had already been up for hours, a pot of strong coffee brewing, his laptop open on the dining table, which was now Command Central. I did a preliminary search on the Westwood Wellness Clinic, he said, handing her a mug. It's a private entity owned by a holding company called Ethelred Capital. Very opaque. But I found something interesting. The listed agent for Ethelred is a law firm, Sloan, Finch & Associates. The name hit her like a jolt. Finch. The doctor who signed Torrens' sterility report was Dr. Alistair Finch. Exactly, Liam said, his eyes glinting. It could be a coincidence, but in this world, I don't believe in them. It seems Dr. Finch didn't just diagnose Torren. He may have stayed in the family's orbit, or at least his firm did. The connection was chilling. The doctor who knew Torren's most profound secret was linked to the clinic where she had her last checkup before the pregnancy. It felt like a deliberate, carefully woven web. "We have to go," she said, her resolve hardening. "The clock is ticking." Liam had arranged for a discreet car service, not a yellow cab. "Torren will have eyes," he'd said. "Assume we're being watched." The journey back to Park Avenue was fraught with a new kind of terror. This wasn't her home anymore. It was enemy territory. She was a spy on a mission. As planned, Torren's Bentley was gone from the private garage. They used the service elevator again. Liam carried 2 large empty duffel bags. "Essentials only, Katya," he cautioned as they stepped into the silent, opulent foyer. "Documents, sentimental items, clothes you can't live without. Nothing he can track. Leave the jewelry he bought you. It's just another set of chains." The penthouse was eerily quiet. It was as if the argument from the night before had been sucked into the expensive upholstery, leaving behind a charged, toxic residue. While Liam stood watch at the door, Katya flew into action. She went straight to their bedroom, a vast space of cool grays and chrome that had always felt more like a hotel suite than a sanctuary. She grabbed her passport, her birth certificate, and a small box of old family photos from her bedside table. She packed jeans, sweaters, and sensible shoes, the clothes of the woman she used to be before Torren had dressed her up like a doll. She left the designer gowns and jewel-encrusted heels hanging in the closet like the shed skin of a former life. Then her eyes fell on the ensuite bathroom. On the marble countertop sat a sleek silver bottle. "Vie éternelle prenatal formula," the elegant script read. "Torren's specially compounded Swiss vitamins." Her heart pounded. She grabbed the bottle along with a sealed, unopened one from the medicine cabinet. This could be the proof they needed. Her final stop was Torren's study. It was a place she rarely entered, his sanctum sanctorum. The room was dark paneled in mahogany and smelled of leather and his expensive cologne. It was the heart of his empire and his secrets. "Katya, we need to go," Liam whispered from the doorway. "Just 1 minute," she said, her instincts screaming at her. She went behind his massive desk. She didn't know what she was looking for. His computer was password protected. But in his top desk drawer beneath a stack of neatly organized papers was a slim leather-bound folio. It wasn't a company document. It looked private. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. The first page was a contract, a service agreement between Torren Hawthorne and a company she'd never heard of, the Genesis Clinic. Her eyes scanned the legalese until they landed on a phrase that made the air freeze in her lungs. "For services rendered in the procurement and cryopreservation of donor gametes." Donor gametes. Sperm. She flipped the page. It was a profile. A donor profile. Donor 734. It listed his physical characteristics: height, hair color, eye color, all remarkably similar to Torren's. It listed his academic achievements and a clean bill of health. But the name was redacted, blacked out with a thick marker. Then she saw the payment schedule. A series of large wire transfers from a private account of Torren's to the Genesis Clinic. And below that, a second set of payments. A monthly retainer paid to a woman, Serafina Dubois. The memo line for each payment was the same consulting fee. Who was Serafina Dubois? A consultant for what? And why was Torren paying a fertility clinic for donor sperm when he was supposedly trying to have a baby with his wife, Katya? Now Liam's voice was urgent. She snapped a picture of every page with her phone, her hands shaking so badly the first few were blurry. She shoved the folio back in the drawer and ran out of the study, her heart threatening to beat its way out of her chest. As they were about to leave, the main elevator dinged. Her blood turned to ice. It couldn't be Torren. He was at his board meeting. The elevator doors slid open and a woman stepped out. She was in her late 60s, impeccably dressed in a Chanel suit, her silver hair styled in a flawless chignon. Her face was a mask of aristocratic disdain. It was Jessamine Hawthorne, Torrin's mother. She surveyed the scene, Katya clutching a purse, Liam holding 2 duffel bags, and her thin lips curled into a semblance of a smile. It didn't reach her cold, calculating eyes. "Well, well," she said, her voice as crisp and brittle as old money. "Leaving so soon, Katya? And with your brother, the little radical?" I see Torrin's assessment of the situation was, as always, astute. Liam stepped in front of Katya protectively. "Mrs. Hawthorne, we're leaving." Jessamine's gaze swept over him dismissively before landing back on Katya. "Are you foolish little girl. Did you really think you could just walk away? Did you think my family would allow a complication like you to disrupt everything?" "This has nothing to do with you, Jessamine," Katya said, finding her voice. "Oh, but it has everything to do with me," she replied, taking a step closer. The scent of her expensive perfume, Jean Patou's Joy, filled the air, a cloying, suffocating fragrance. A legacy is at stake. The Hawthorne name, my grandchild. Her eyes dropped to Katya's stomach and her expression softened into something that for a terrifying moment looked like warmth. "You don't have to run, dear. We can be reasonable. Torrin is angry, yes. He is proud. But he can be managed. I can talk to him." She opened her handbag and pulled out a checkbook. "You are carrying a Hawthorne. That makes you important to us. But you are not equipped to be its mother. Give us the child. I will personally see to it that you are set up for life. A new name, a beautiful home in the south of France. Anything you desire. You can live out your days in comfort. All you have to do is sign the papers after the birth and walk away." It was the same offer Torrin had made, but coated in a veneer of matriarchal concern that was somehow more repulsive. She wasn't just offering to buy the baby. She was offering Katya a golden cage in exchange for her soul. "He is not a Hawthorne," Katya said, her voice shaking with rage. "I don't know who he is, but he is not a Hawthorne. And he is my son. Mine. He is not for sale." Jessamine's mask of civility crumbled. Her face hardened, her eyes flashing with a venomous fury that was so much like her son's. "You ungrateful little tramp! You come into my son's life with nothing, and this is how you repay him, by opening your legs to some stranger and trying to pass off your bastard child as his." "That's enough," Liam said, his voice deadly calm. "We're done here." He took Katya's arm and steered her toward the service elevator. Jessamine's voice followed them down the hall, shrill and laced with panic. "You won't get away with this. Torrin will find you. He will take that child from you, and he will leave you with nothing. You will be ruined. Do you hear me? Ruined." The service elevator doors slid shut, cutting off her tirade. Katya collapsed against the wall, trembling uncontrollably. She had known Torrin was a monster, but now she knew the monstrosity was inherited. The entire Hawthorne family was rotten to the core. They didn't care about a child. They cared about an heir, a commodity. Back in the car, speeding away from that life for good, Katya showed Liam the photos on her phone. He scrolled through them, his brow furrowed in concentration. "The Genesis Clinic," he muttered. "Donor 734. Serafina Dubois." He looked up at her, his eyes dark with a chilling realization. "Katya, this is darker than we imagined. He wasn't just hiding his sterility. He had a plan, an elaborate premeditated plan to create an heir using a donor, and he was going to pass the child off as his own." "But how did I get pregnant?" she cried, the question still tormenting her. "If I didn't have IVF, how did the donor sperm?" Liam looked at the picture of the vitamin bottle, then back at the legal documents on the phone. "I don't know for sure," he said slowly, his voice grim. "But I have a sickening theory. It's called cryptic insemination. It's highly unethical, illegal in most places, and almost impossible to prove. But for a man with Torrin's resources and connections to Dr. Finch's network and a private clinic, he wouldn't need your consent if he could bypass it entirely. The implication was horrifying. The vitamins from Switzerland. The private clinic. Dr. Hansen. Had her routine checkup been anything but? Had she been inseminated like livestock without her knowledge or consent? It was a violation so profound she couldn't wrap her mind around it. Now we have a name. Liam said, his voice like steel. Serafina Dubois. She's the key. We find her. We find out her role in all this, and we find out the identity of donor 734. He looked at Katya, his hand covering hers. This is our new mission. We're not just escaping Katya. We're hunting. They went to ground, retreating to a secluded family cabin in the Catskills. The isolation was a balm to Katya's fractured nerves. While she focused on her health, Liam converted the rustic living room into a war room. He hired a sharp private investigator, an ex-cop named Marcus Thorne, who began charting the dark constellation of Torrin's deceit, the doctors, the clinics, and the mysterious Serafina Dubois. The first breakthrough came from the unopened bottle of Swiss vitamins. Liam had it sent to a lab for analysis. The results were sickening. It's worse than we thought, Liam said, his face grim as he read the report. The pills weren't just nutrients. They contained a powerful sedative and a cocktail of hormones designed to optimize fertility. The clinical words painted a horrifying picture. He was drugging me, Katya whispered, the violation stealing her breath. She had been an unwilling participant in her own pregnancy. Her anger, once a spark, now hardened into cold, unbreakable resolve. Soon after Marcus Thorne's investigation bore fruit, the money trail laundered through shell corporations led him to Serafina Dubois. He found her address in a discreet Soho apartment building. I have to see her, Katya declared, her voice firm. The time for hiding was over. They approached with caution. While Liam and Marcus waited nearby, Katya went to the building alone, her heart a steady drum against her ribs. She buzzed the apartment. My name is Katya Hawthorne, she said into the intercom, her voice clear. We need to talk about Torrin. After a tense silence, the lock clicked open. The woman who answered the door. Serafina was not the cold accomplice Katya had envisioned. She was elegant, with intelligent, weary eyes that held a universe of regret. Mrs. Hawthorne, she said softly, I knew this day would come. Please come in. Inside the minimalist apartment, the truth finally spilled out. I was a geneticist. Serafina began, her hands trembling. I ran a fertility clinic called Genesis. Torrin came to me years ago, obsessed with having a biological heir he knew he could never produce. When I told him it was impossible, he changed the plan. He wanted a child that appeared to be his, using a donor who was a perfect physical match. Donor 734. Katya breathed. Serafina nodded. But that wasn't enough for him. He insisted the child be carried by you to complete the illusion. I told him it was illegal, a monstrous ethical breach. But he had leveraged my brother's gambling debts. Torrin paid them, and in return he owned me. He forced me to orchestrate everything. The drugged vitamins, the procedure. Dr. Hansen at the Westwood Clinic was one of his puppets, too. Her voice broke. I am so sorry. I've lived with this guilt every day. The confession was damning, but one final crucial question remained. Who was the donor? Katya asked, her voice trembling. Who is my baby's father? A fresh wave of fear washed over Serafina's face. Torrin's cruelty has layers, she explained. He wanted the donor to be someone he could control completely, an insurance policy. He chose his younger brother, Michael. The name landed with the force of a physical blow. Michael Hawthorne, the disowned artist, the family disgrace. Torrin despised him, Serafina whispered. He found Michael, offered him life-changing money to be the donor, and forced him to sign an NDA and disappear. It was his ultimate twisted victory to use the genetics of the brother he hated to create the heir he would raise as his own. Armed with Seraphina's sworn affidavit, Liam's team moved swiftly. They located Michael Hawthorne living a quiet, anonymous life in a small town on the coast of Maine. He was a painter of melancholic seascapes, a man haunted by a deal he had never fully understood. Katja traveled to Maine to meet him. Standing on a wind-swept cliff overlooking the Atlantic, she saw a man who shared Torrin's frame, but none of his menace. His eyes were kind. They were her baby's eyes. "I am so sorry," Michael said, his voice thick with regret. "I never knew." In that moment, standing beside the stranger, who was the biological father of her child, Katja felt the last piece of the puzzle click into place. He was not a ghost. He was family. The final confrontation was not a dramatic showdown, but a swift legal execution. Liam presented Torrin's lawyers with their arsenal, Seraphina's testimony, the lab reports, Michael's statement, and the threat of criminal charges for assault and unlawful insemination. The story, if made public, would not just tarnish the Hawthorne name, it would obliterate the entire empire. Jessamine Hawthorne attempted a desperate smear campaign, but against the mountain of evidence it was useless. Faced with total ruin, Torrin folded. The divorce was quiet and absolute. The fraudulent prenup was voided and Katja accepted a settlement that would ensure her child's security. She refused to take a penny more of his blood money. Torrin relinquished all paternal rights in exchange for their silence on Michael's identity, a final pathetic attempt to control a narrative he had already lost. Katja walked away from the marriage with her freedom, her dignity, and the precious life inside her. 2 months later, she gave birth to a beautiful, healthy boy. She named him Liam after the brother who had saved her, and gave him the last name Vance. He had his Uncle Michael's kind eyes and his mother's resilient spirit. Michael became a quiet, loving presence in their lives, his art slowly filling with a light that had long been absent. Katja never saw Torrin or Jessamine again. The last she heard, Hawthorne Holdings was in turmoil, and Torrin had become a recluse in his golden penthouse, a king ruling an empire of shadows. He had his legacy, but he was utterly alone, having lost the future he tried so desperately to steal. Katja, however, had found hers. It wasn't a life of opulence, but it was real, and it was free. Katja's journey started with a shocking betrayal in the cold, sterile light of an ultrasound room, and ended with her reclaiming her strength, her identity, and her future. She escaped a gilded cage, exposed a web of lies that ran deeper than she could ever have imagined, and fought for the most precious thing in her life, her child. Her story is a powerful testament to resilience, the unbreakable bond of family, and the fact that truth is a power that even a millionaire's money cannot suppress. What would you have done in Katja's position? Let us know in the comments below.